Welcome to 2019. No, 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 absolutely not. No, not going to happen. Not going to do that. No, there's no chance. There's no way. This is not gonna. No, absolutely not. Over my dead body, no. No, siree. Not possible. No way, nada, nunca, zip, niet. No how, no way, no, hell no. I have a theory that we realize from our earliest ability to be aware of our relationship with the world that we live in, that no is a powerful word. That we can put a stop to things. We can derail ideas and we can manipulate our environment. That no is a power word. If you don't believe me, watch a 2-year-old at work. They're learning their power. They're understanding their boundaries, and they learn by expressing no. No is a word that puts us in control. No is a word that allows us to manage and to manipulate. When we say yes to something, we lose all control. We basically empower the people around us. We give them permission to follow their agenda. But with a no, we stay in control. We stay above and beyond the desires of others. It's the power of no. And I believe we grow up with this sense that yes is an impotent word, but no is a powerful word. If you don't believe me, go down to the DMV. All of the power is in the no. All of the power in a bureaucracy is a prohibitive power. It is the ability to stop things from happening. Giving permission to make things happen means we give up control. And I think we live unintentionally with this idea that no is more powerful than yes. As we enter into 2019, I want us to accept the challenge to make 2019 not just a positive year, but a year of yes. A year where we say yes more than we say no. Where we say yes to our children, where we say yes to our friends, where we say yes to those in need, where we say yes to God more than we say no. And it's because there is a true power in yes. Now that doesn't mean it's not risky. That doesn't mean it's not dangerous. That doesn't mean it's not challenging. Because no is a fear-based thing. We say no when we're afraid. We say yes when we're brave, when we're courageous, because it's intimidating to say yes. It's especially intimidating to say yes to God. And so what I want to do over the next few weeks, I want to share with you some stories of some people who said yes fearlessly to God. Who said yes to God even though they were reluctant to do it. Even though saying yes to God meant saying no to something else. Even though saying yes to God meant a revolution in their life. And today I want to begin to consider the power of yes by considering a story of the most ridiculous yes ever spoken. But before we talk about that, would you pray with me for a moment? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, and that you would use your word spoken by your servant, anointed by your Spirit, to challenge us, not just to be a positive people, but be a people who will say yes, especially to you. Pray that for myself and for my family, to all of us here. For I ask that in Jesus' name, amen. From the very beginning, the character of God was defined by the titles that the people of God assigned to God. In the Hebrew Bible, there are 2 titles that are applied to God. The first one is the Hebrew word Adonai. Adonai. Is it? Yeah, Adonai. There. Adonai, right? It means Lord, it means master. It's a generic sort of secular word that identifies a person of power. It can be applied to God or it can be applied to a human being. And the word Adonai is generally translated Lord or master. The second word is the word Elohim. Elohim. Elohim, right? Yeah. Elohim is like sort of the generic word for God. It means God. Elohim means God, and it can mean God with a big G or God with a little g. It can mean the God of the universe, or it can mean a person who imagines himself to be God. You use the word Elohim. Now, the word Elohim was often contracted to be represented by just the first part of the word, just by the word El. It occurs in a lot of Hebrew language. Maybe you're familiar with the name Daniel or Ezekiel or Israel. These are people or characteristics of God. The word Elohim or the word El is also combined with 4 other words throughout the Hebrew Bible. The first one is it's combined with El Elyon, and it describes God as the Most High God. God is called El Elyon, or the Most High God. It is also called El Olam, or the God of eternity, or the God everlasting, the eternal God. He's also called El Roi, or the God who sees. And then maybe you've heard of this one, El Shaddai, the God who is Lord Almighty. These are titles that are applied to the God of Israel. But there's only one name that God said, this is the name that you are to call me. And that is the name Yahweh. Yahweh. It occurs 6,823 times in the Hebrew Bible, and yet a devout Hebrew person, especially a rabbi, would never say the word Yahweh. When they were reading in the text and they came across the name of God, Yahweh, they would substitute a word that they made up. They took the vowels from the word Adonai and combined them with the consonants of Yihweh, and they came up with the word Yehovah. Jehovah is a word that does not technically occur in the Hebrew Bible. It is a placeholder so that a devout Jewish person who didn't want to violate by saying, and they wouldn't even write the name Yahweh, they would say in its place, Jehovah. Now, the word Yahweh is combined with a number of other attributes in the Bible, and there are 9 names of God that are compound names with Jehovah or Yahweh. One of them is Jehovah Em Kadosh. Jehovah Em Kadosh means God is my sanctuary, or God is my refuge, or God is my sanctification. Jehovah Nissi says God is my banner. I always think of Lord of the Rings when I see Jehovah Nissi or I see Yahweh Nissi. God is my banner. It's the flag that identifies I am in relationship with the God Yahweh. There is the word Jehovah or Yahweh Ra'ah, which is the Lord is my shepherd. This is Psalm 23. It actually begins with Yahweh Ra'ah. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. The word Jehovah Rophe means God is my healer. Jehovah Sabaoth is God is the God of hosts, or God is the God, my God, of the heavenly armies. Jehovah or Yahweh Sabaoth, Yahweh Shalom is the God of peace. Yahweh Shammah is God who is present. And Yahweh Sidkenu, or Jehovah Sidkenu, is the Lord is my righteousness. But the first time in the Hebrew Bible that a compound use of Yahweh is expressed is in the 22nd chapter of the book of Genesis. And in Genesis chapter 22, God is identified as Yahweh Yireh. Yahweh Yireh. Right? No. There. Yahweh Yireh. It means God is my provider. And it's in Genesis chapter 22 where Yahweh Yireh, God is identified as Jehovah Jireh or Yahweh Yireh for the first time. And it is in the most absurdly ridiculous story of a person saying yes to God anywhere in the Bible, because it is the story of the sacrifice of Isaac. In Genesis chapter 22, and Genesis chapter 22 begins very ominously, because it begins with the statement that God came to test Abraham's faith. Not sure how you would fare if God came to test your faith, but most of us would need God to grade on a severe curve to pass that test. But it ominously begins by saying God came to test Abraham's faith and to see if he would say yes to him. And so what he tells him to do, he says, Abraham, and Abraham says, yes, Lord, here I am. He says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take your son, the son I had promised you, your one and only son, the son who you love, desperately love. I want you to take him, your son Isaac, and I want you to go to the land of Moriah, to a mountain that I will point out to you, and there I want you to murder him, and I want you to offer him to me as a burnt offering. Just let that sit in for a minute. God said, if you're going to say yes to me, I want you to go and sacrifice your son. Interesting enough, the very next verse, it says that next morning, early, first thing, Abraham gets up. He gets two of his servants. He gets a donkey. He gets the wood. He gets the fire. He gets his son Isaac. And sure enough, the very next day, they set off for the land of Moriah. They travel for 3 days. They finally get to the place where Abraham sees the mountain, and he says, that's the spot. He says to the two men that are with him, his two servants, he says, you stay here. My son and I are going to climb the mountain. We're going to worship God there, and we will be right back. So they set off together up Mount Moriah, and it's there, as they're going up Mount Moriah, that Isaac finally asks the question that I think I would have asked before we even left home. Hey, Dad, I understand about this burnt offering thing. I've seen you do that before, and I understand that we have the fire, and I understand that we have the wood, and I see you brought your big old slaughtering knife, and I got all that, but aren't we supposed to have some kind of animal? Aren't we supposed to have a sheep or a lamb or something to offer in this burnt offering? And I like to imagine that as they were walking up the hill, Abraham gave Isaac a side eye, and with clenched teeth, he said, Yahweh Yireh, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. It tells us there in Genesis chapter 22, when they got to the spot on Mount Moriah where they were going to make the offering, they built an altar. Father and son project, dad and his son building a pile, building a barbecue there on this mountain. They stoked it with all the wood. They probably took the day to build this really nice looking altar, and at some point when they were done, Abraham fell on his son and he tied him up, and then he lifted him up and he placed him on top of the altar. And he drew out the slaughtering knife, and he had every intention of murdering his son. At that moment, it says, an angel interrupted them. And an angel said, you passed the test. You did. God knows that you fear him. God knows that you will say yes to him. And so this is a good thing. Thank you. You don't have to kill the boy. We were just kidding. It was just a test. And oh, by the way, there's a ram over there caught in the thicket. And they looked over, and there was a ram caught by its horns in the bramble on Mount Moriah. And Abraham was able to go over and to kill the ram. And he took his son off of the altar and then placed the ram on it. And they had a barbecued offering of ram there on the mountain. And as they were offering this burnt offering to God, the angel came to him and said, God knows that you would not withhold that which is most precious. God knows that you fear him, and because of that, you will be blessed. And then he said, your descendants will multiply, and they will outnumber the stars of the sky and the sand of the sea. And no one will prevail against them. They will conquer their enemies. That this nation, your descendants, will exist throughout human history. They won't be blotted out. And by the way, Abraham, because of your obedience, because you said yes to me, there will be a group of people sitting in a building in Austin, Texas, thousands and thousands of years from now. And the whole world will be blessed because of your obedience. Now, I think if you are a rational person and you read that story, you go, no, hell no. I mean, if this is what it means to say yes to God, no, I'm out. You want to know why it's hard to say yes to God? Because we read this story and we go, what a cosmic bully. Who devises these tests like this to say, I want you to give up what is most precious to you as an expression of your faith? What kind of cosmic universal jerk is God to devise a test like that? I'm not sure that a rational person hears that story and goes, well, yeah, that's the God I want to follow. I can't wait till he asks me for something. Now, I know there are those of you who are here who are deeply spiritual, and your faith is real and vital, and you're going, whoa, slow down, Dave. You got to look at this from God's point of view. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't want to jump off the cliff of unbelief just because you don't understand what's going on. If you look at this story from God's point of view, you realize that this story is just part of a greater story. That God, as the Father, thousands of years later, would place his own Son in that same position. That as the story in Genesis chapter 2 describes for us the sacrifice of Isaac and Abraham offering his one and only begotten Son, that should sound familiar to us. That if we see it as a part of the greater story of redemption, as we see it as a prologue or as an introduction, a preliminary revelation of the character and the heart of God, we see God, thousands of years later, offering his own Son. In fact, it's interesting how they traveled for 3 days. There was 3 days of mystery. Isn't it interesting that Abraham took the wood that was the mechanism of the sacrifice and placed it on his son's back? That if we look at this from God's point of view, we begin to see that God is creating a story of redemption, and this was the first chapter. This was a hint. This was a clue. This was a revelation of the character of God as our Father, because thousands of years later, the story would be completed and God would offer his own Son. But that doesn't work for most of us, because most of us don't see this story and we don't see our life from God's point of view. We see this story and we see our life from Isaac's point of view. Because we are the ones who feel like God is dragging us on a journey and he's not telling us where we're going. He's not giving us any hints about what is going to happen. I mean, we have no idea why we're having to climb the mountain of life or what it is. And then we find ourselves on the altar. We find ourselves tied up by confusion and uncertainty and anxiety and disappointment and failure. And we find ourselves on the altar and we have done nothing wrong. And we turn to our Father and we say, what? Why are you doing this? And we get Yahweh Yireh. We get, trust me. We get, trust me. You want to know why it's so hard to say yes to God? Because that's what we get. We get, trust me. Trust me. Because the story of the sacrifice of Isaac is meant to be seen through Abraham's eyes. Because how was it that Abraham took his son? How was it that when God came to him, the angel comes and he says, I want you to go to Moriah and I want you to sacrifice your son. How is it that the next morning, first thing, he gets up and goes, here we go, let's go to party town and kill my son? What kind of whack job is he? How was it possible for him to say yes to such an incredible request? And it wasn't like he said yes and then went and did it. They hiked for 3 days. They hiked for 3 days. They had plenty of time to doubt and had plenty of time to go, maybe this isn't such a good idea. As he's hiking up the mountain with his precious son, his son looks at him. And he says, hey, Dad, can you tell me what's going on? He had plenty of times to change his mind. He had plenty of opportunities to say, I said yes to God, but maybe not now. Maybe no. How did he do it? It's because when they got there, he knew Yahweh Yireh. He dedicated that place as the place that is called the place where Jehovah Jireh, or Yahweh Yireh, where God provides. Because he knew this about God. You see, this is interesting, the etymology of the word Yarah. It is the Hebrew word to see. It is the most common word in the Hebrew Bible that describes vision or observation. It literally means to see. But in the Hebrew language, the word began to be understood not just as seeing, but as understanding. You see in order to know. So the word Yarah came to mean to understand or to discern or to perceive. In fact, the word eventually morphed to mean a seer. The word Rophe, which comes from Ra'ah, is the word for prophet. And the Hebrews understood that Yahweh Yireh was the God who sees. But he doesn't just see, he understands. He is the God who knows. He is the God who understands and can discern what is best. He is the God who knows the end from the beginning. That Yahweh Yireh is the God who sees and knows and understands. We could say Yahweh Yireh is the God who gets it. And he doesn't just get it, he gets us. He understands us. He knows what's best for us. And this is the God that Abraham said yes to. We use the word see in exactly the same way. Don't you see? You see it. See what I'm saying? You see? You know. When we understand something, we say, I see it. I see. Do you understand what I'm asking you? Yeah, I see. I mean, we use the word in exactly the same way. We not only use it in the same way in terms of seeing and understanding, like, yes, I see, I get it, I see, I understand, but we also use the word see in the same way they do, that we say something like this, I'll see to it, or I'll see you through it. It's exactly the same meaning. How did Abraham do what he did? How did Abraham have the courage to say yes to such a ridiculous request? Because he knew that his God was the God who sees. His God was the God who gets it. So what? So how does that work? I think that means Abraham looked at his life forensically. You see, many years before, decades before, Abraham was a dirt farmer in Iran. He lived in a place called Ur of the Chaldees. When God appeared to him and said, I want you to go into a land I will give to your descendants. And it will be called the Promised Land. And I want you to take everything you have and leave everyone you know and go to a strange land because I have this for you. And Abraham said yes to him. And Abraham went from Ur of the Chaldees to the Promised Land. And the land of Israel exists to this day because Abraham said yes. God said, I want to make a great nation of you. I want to give you descendants. And Abraham said, but I don't have any children, and my wife is barren, and at this point we're both over 100 years old. And God says, I see you. I understand. And he gave him a son, Isaac. And as Abraham looked forensically over his life, every time God had asked him to do something and he said yes, God had provided. God had seen the end from the beginning. And so he had the courage to say yes when he couldn't see beyond the reason. It's how we do it. It's how we see our life. I mean, who of us doesn't have enough evidence in our life to look back on our life and connect the dots and say, oh, if this had happened, my life would have been totally different. Or I'm so glad that this didn't happen. Or when this came up, I can't believe the good fortune or the good luck or the blessing of these things. As we look back on our life, we can see the breadcrumbs, we can see the dots, and we can connect that God has been at work in us, shaping us, strengthening us. And you're saying, but Dave, you don't know how hard my life is. You don't know what I've had to give up. You don't know what this has cost me, but you're still here. And you're still strong. And even though we may suffer disappointment and failure and frustration and confusion, God says, I see you. I see you. And you can go through your life trying to make the most of the best of what you've got, or you can take that which is most precious to you and you can put it on the altar and say, I trust you with this. Because it happens whether we want it to or not. It happens voluntarily or involuntarily. Everything winds up on the altar. Everything winds up with the recognition that we cannot control everything. Whether it's our health or our finances or our careers or our relationships or our children. Whether we put it there or whether it winds up there, everything we are and everything we have will eventually wind up on that altar. Now, I don't know about you, but I go there kicking and screaming. I think most of my adult life has been a journey in saying yes to God, increasingly abandoning myself to the idea that Jehovah Jireh, that Yahweh Yireh, that God is trustworthy because God gets it. God gets me. God will see me through it. I've had to learn that in my relationships, in my career, in my marriage, in my children, in my finances. I'm learning how to do it here. I had to learn how to do that. Because I got into this thing. I got into this big show because I wanted to convince you of things. I wanted to convince you to believe. I wanted to win the argument. I wanted to be the smartest person in the room so that the person who had the greatest doubts and the greatest fears, because I said something that was so fantastic, that they would believe. And I've had to put that on the altar and say, it's not up to me. I can't do that for you. All I can do is kind of tell you what I think. And between what I think and what you need, God does the rest. I've had to kind of set that up there. And it's not easy to do because it takes courage to do it. No is fear-based. Do you want to come bungee jumping with me? No. You want to skydive? No. You want to eat this 5,000 Scoville pepper? No, don't want to do that. Do you want to try these crazy things? No is motivated by our fear of loss of control, our fear of the outcome that we have no say in. Yes takes courage. Yes takes guts. Yes takes believing that Yahweh Yireh, that God sees, that God knows, God understands, God gets it. And sometimes it's ridiculous to say yes to God. And sometimes it requires us resisting the urge to do something else or to give up. Sometimes it requires us to repent and to start over and to begin again. Sometimes it requires us to give up our reluctance. And sometimes it turns our life upside down, and it's revolutionary. But the yes is always powerful. It's always difficult, but it is always transformational and powerful. So yes, sure, absolutely, totally, 100%. No doubt about it. I'm in, yeah, go for it, sure, totally, absolutely, perfectly, yes, oh, absolutely, yes. Yes, sirree, Bob, yes, indeedy, yes, absolutely. Go for it, I'm in, I'm with you, yes. It's my hope that 2019 will be the year of yes. I'm hoping for that in my life, that I will say yes more to my wife and to my kids, to my friends, to those in need, to those around me, to people who cross my path, that I will say yes more than no in 2019. That's my hope for us. That 2019 won't just be a positive year, it will be a year of yes. And I'm not hoping just that 2019 will be a year of yes and not a year of no for us. I'm hoping that 2019 will be a year of the Texas yes, which is hell yeah. Welcome to 2019.